So, I don't think there are many things that get me out of bed at 1 o'clock in the morning to make a video on, but I think this warrants it, because on Twitter, which again is not the most reliable source of information, they're saying that the Acolyte Season 2 has been canned. The Acolyte has been killed in its crib after just one short season, and understandably there's been a very vocal and visceral reaction from every element of the Star Wars fandom. I think that, you look at it and there's going to be people who are going to be celebrating this news because even before the show got its first trailer, they were, vying for this show to fail because they don't like diversity or they don't like real life issues being brought up in Star Wars, which is something that has happened since the very first film. And likewise, there's going to be people who are feeling very disappointed and angry because they liked the show, they wanted it to succeed, and they feel let down, whether it's by Disney or, the other side of the audience. Who knows? I find myself sat somewhere in the middle. I find myself, again, being someone who wanted the show to succeed, but very much recognised and voiced the fact that, in my opinion, Season 1 wasn't good enough. It just did not do enough to warrant it getting a second season. I would have liked there to have been a second season just to play on some of the themes and stories that were established. But I could absolutely say I'm not shocked that, this show is not getting a second season, because it had a very, very uphill challenge from the get-go. Ignoring the visceral reaction from the toxic elements of the fan base, you have to understand that this show tried to do something different, which is, respectable. I do appreciate the fact that they were trying in a different era to do something a little different, which I'm all for. However, when you're doing that, and especially for a Disney Plus series at a time when we're not getting a lot of Star Wars content, you have to nail it. You have to make sure there's no doubts about the quality of the show. And that's simply because Disney Plus caters to a more casual audience. And so the casual audience is not going to be as interested in a show that takes on some risks and doesn't have some pre-established characters like an Obi-Wan or like an Ahsoka. So immediately you're fighting an uphill battle. And so that's all the more crucial why you have to make sure that your story is nailed down, your show is ran in a way that, makes it really tight-knit. And The Acolyte just wasn't that. It had some really interesting ideas. It had some great choreography. At times it had some great acting. But it just fell apart with the way that it was structured, the way it was paced. The fact that it felt like a film stretched out into 8 really short episodes. And for me personally, after every episode bar 1, episode 5, which was the best episode, I always felt unfulfilled. Again, really enjoyed the first 2 episodes, and it kind of just went a bit downhill from there. As much as I tried to like it, I just could not see beyond the flaws. And again, I did an hour-long video on my, on a breakdown of every episode, so I'm not going to go into it here. If you want to see that, I'll probably pop it in the description. But for me, it just floundered, and it wasn't good enough to justify a second season. Now, it's got nothing to do with lesbian space witches or diversity or a woke agenda, and absolutely everything to do with the core elements of building a good story into a TV show. And, some of that was acting, some of it was pacing, some of it was structure, and some of it was just the story. Again, I felt like they tried to cram too much in. It felt confused at times, and there were just some elements I didn't enjoy. But overall, I wouldn't have been disappointed for it to get a second season. I would have liked to have seen where they wanted to go. But at the same time, I'm not surprised. Again, they took a risk and it missed. And for $180 million, which again, part of me thinks, when I think about the reasoning for this as to why Lucasfilm would not grant a second season, my mind goes to several different factors. One definitely would be the quality. I think people within Lucasfilm would look at it and go, yeah, it definitely didn't do what we were hoping it would do. Part of it would have been the online reaction. I think that they would have looked at it, and not necessarily from the perspective of fans hated this, so we're going to cancel it, but more from there's this really vocal element of the fan base who are up in arms. We don't necessarily care about their opinion because we know that they are acting in bad faith for the most part, but is it really worth the hassle and the effort that, comes along with trying to put out shows like this? And I think some people have just said it's not worth the effort for battling against that toxic element of the fandom. And again, part of it is going to be the sheer cost of the show. $180 million for 8 half-an-hour episodes is just not giving them the return that they need. And again, I was shocked when I heard the figure for the show, because that is the budget of a medium-sized Star Wars film. And this might just be me, but I'd much rather have a medium-sized Star Wars film than a mediocre 8-episode TV show on Disney Plus that just doesn't do it for me. I mean, that's my personal opinion. There's something about a movie, it's a spectacle. Seeing things on the big screen is always better for me. And I'm just not grooving with a lot of these Disney Plus shows. They're not terrible, but I just think to myself, would I rather have this or another Star Wars story on the big screen? And I always default to, Star Wars story on the big screen. And so I think, that is definitely an element of it, because I don't think it necessarily did huge numbers from what we've seen so far. Again, we're still in the early days for viewing figures, and I always get confused with streaming numbers because they do it in minutes rather than people. So I don't look into it too heavily. I know that the first 2 episodes did a lot better than they were expecting. It wasn't far off the Ahsoka premiere, which, Ahsoka debuted to big numbers. But it feels like since those first 2 episodes, it's just dropped off. The interest dropped off. And the viewing figures just weren't there for it. And, again, you can't blame an audience if they're not interested. By all means, the review bombing was pretty shitty. People who didn't even give the show a chance. And a lot of, opinions being formed just off of, a few big YouTubers who are the typical kind of candidates for, rage bait, because that's how they make money. Your Star Wars Theory, your Nerdrotic, your Geeks and Gamers, all of the usual suspects who will rile up their audience who probably haven't even seen the show, to convince them that it's the worst woke crap ever. That's definitely, a shitty element of this whole scenario. I feel like had that not been a part of it, it's very likely that the Acolyte still wouldn't be getting a second season, and we'd still be sat here saying, well, it wasn't that good, but you would feel a little bit more able to have a genuine and open conversation. And I've seen it online. Unfortunately, the toxicity goes both ways at times, because it feels like recently you can't criticize the Acolyte without being branded some kind of a hater from a certain element of the audience. And it's kind of like that duality of toxicity. One breeds the other. The audience saying this is the worst woke crap ever, and if you like it, you're a Disney shill. That makes people on the other side start to say, well, if you hate it, then you're obviously this right-wing, racist, misogynistic arsehole who just wants the show to fail. And you got people in the middle, like me, who are like, I gave it a chance, I wanted it to succeed. I hate the fact that the fandom menace are going to see this as a victory, because, they're going to think that, woke agendas are killing Star Wars when it's anything but. It's just kind of like, you can't sit there and feel like you can have an open conversation about your genuine feelings on this show without being branded one way or the other. And again, I'm still of the opinion that the majority of Star Wars fans are not terminally online. They don't pay any mind to the opinions of others. They make their own mind up. And again, I feel like the critical reviews, by all means, they weren't the worst. They weren't the best either, but they were nowhere near the reviews that the review bombers were giving it. And I think that kind of shows you it was a kind of 5-6 out of 10 show. And most people would agree with that. A 5-6 out of 10 show is not strong enough to give a second season. Especially not if you are paying $180 million a pop. By all means, if we're looking at a show like Obi-Wan Kenobi, which again, I didn't necessarily think was very good, if we're not even giving that a second season, and that did great numbers, then I don't think we're getting a second season of The Acolyte. So people will look into this more than what it is. People will look into it and say, well, it failed because of wokeness. And people will say, well, it failed because, Disney is acquiescing to the right-wing misogynists. And actually, the truth is just simply that the show wasn't very good. It certainly had its interesting elements, but it cannot be justified for $180 million. And yes, we will be disappointed there won't be a season 2, but I don't think the majority of us will be surprised. And I am not looking forward to, once again, the cycle of toxicity online that this will breed. Because again, one way or the other, whether the show got a second season or it didn't, you're going to have those two same parties vying back and forth, celebrating their victory or being angry at their loss. It doesn't matter if it was one side saying, we got a second season, we proved you wrong, or if it's the other side going, that show got cancelled, it's woke trash, we proved you wrong. It's just unbearable. Some people just live online and just cannot enjoy things for the sake of enjoying them, and be kind of realistic and rational about things. So, by all means, if you enjoyed the show and you're disappointed, that's valid. If, you didn't like the show and you're not surprised, that's valid. If you hate the show just because it was, Disney and you think it was woke trash, that's not valid. Because, you've not clearly taken the time to assess the show yourself with your own intelligence. But unfortunately, this is all going to get completely covered by, the typical kind of online reaction. So that's my thoughts, basically. I'm not surprised. I'm not massively disappointed. I do think that they didn't do enough to earn a second season. I can only hope that going forward, that Lucasfilm really kind of thinks about future projects, and has a more stringent... I'm surprised at how many times this happens. They pass off a project to someone and, by all means, they have their own vision for it, but it just doesn't feel like there is any kind of quality control at the top. People are allowed to do whatever they want, spend the money in the way that they want, and there's a lack of consistency, across the board. It happened with the movies. It's happening with the TV shows. Don't get me wrong, there's been some really good TV shows, but there's also been some really bad ones. And it just feels like Disney needs to really get a grip of this now, because, the extremism is not going to go away. That's always going to be there. So you've got to make sure that your shows are now spot on from this point out. So I really hope Disney does get their act together, And that's not saying, I want more, white men in Star Wars. It's me saying I want more good quality stories in Star Wars. So anyway, that's my thoughts. I'm gonna upload this video and then go to bed because I've got to be up for work in the morning. So thank you for watching, and we'll see what happens with the news as this spreads.